The Olympic giant ship from the White Star Line Company was launched on October 20th, 1910. It was its twin brothers, the transatlantic liners Titanic and Britannic, which were competitors of the Lusitania and Mauretania, which belonged to the White Star Line Company. But unlike their twin brothers, and many Olympic competitors had a happier fate. The legendary Titanic sank during its maiden voyage in the North Atlantic after colliding with an iceberg on the night of April 14th to 15th, 1912. The Britain sank on November 21st, 1916, after running into a German mine in the strait. The Lusitania was torpedoed by a German submarine and sank on May 7, 1915, 19 kilometers from the coast of Ireland. The Olympic worked for many years, having undergone a huge number of tests. And only in 1935 it was withdrawn from the fleet and for 5 months stood with its former rival Mauretania, awaiting disposal externally. The Olympic was very similar to the Titanic, and it could be distinguished by subsequent features on the Olympic. While on the Titanic, this part of the ship up to the second chimney was glazed on the Titanic. The wings of the captain's bridge, unlike the Olympic, protruded beyond the bulwarks, and the ports on the decks were different and through which the first-class passengers climbed onto the ship Olympic. On the doors of Deck D there were round portholes on the Titanic rectangular windows when the Titanic was discovered in 1986. The door on Deck D was open. Rectangular windows were clearly visible on it. Years later this door will be raised and it will become an exhibit of an exhibition traveling around the world. Door with rectangular windows raised from the Titanic refutes the conspiracy theory that instead of the Titanic at the bottom of the North Atlantic lies the Olympic. Olympic was supposed to be launched in the fall of 1910. But a problem arose and Southampton and New York refused to modernize the ports so that the giant Olympic-class liners could moor. They insisted so that such work would be fully paid for by White Star Line. During difficult negotiations, an agreement was reached that the cost of dredging work would be paid by the Port Authority. On October 20th, 1910, the Olympic was launched to facilitate the launch. 23 tons of oil and soap were used. Then the liner was put in dry dock where it was equipped with propellers in 1911. The Olympic successfully passed the test, reaching a speed of 23 knots. On June 15, 1911, the Olympic visited Queenstown and then went to New York. The captain of the Olympic on this voyage was Edward John Smith. He was considered the most experienced captain of the White Star Line Company. A year later he would die on the Titanic. The director of the shipping company, Joseph Ismay, was on the ship, and in a year he will also be on the Titanic. But unlike the captain, Joseph will be able to survive while on the Olympic. Joseph, he observed what could be improved. It was he who noticed that the first-class promenade on Deck B was not in demand. He proposed to remove it on the Titanic and replace it with extended cabins. Moreover, during the voyage, he noticed that the open part of the promenade on the deck was filled with water in bad weather. That is why Joseph proposed glazing the front part of the promenade on the Titanic, which was done. The first incident with the Olympic occurred in New York. A port tug was pulled under a giant ship. Its stern was badly damaged. Only scratches remained on the Olympic. Another incident happened on February 24th. 1912, 700 miles from Newfoundland. The crew felt a strong vibration of the propeller shaft. Passengers later recalled that the Olympic was shaking very strongly. It felt like you were on a train that entered a sharp turn upon arrival at the port. It was discovered that the liner had lost one blade on the left propeller. It was not possible to establish the cause of the incident. Assumptions were made that the ship could have hit some kind of sunken object, or that the fastening of the blades had become very loose and could not withstand the load 6 months before this incident. The Olympic collided with the cruiser Hawkliner was heading towards the Isle of Wight. The crew knew this fairway, but nevertheless took all precautions. Several officers took observer positions at the bow of the ship, at the stern, and in the crow's nest. The ship was led by a pilot. Turning to the southwest of the officer noticed the cruiser Hawk. which was heading to a speedhead anchorage in the Solon Strait between the Isle of Wight and the Hampshire coast. After 3 minutes, the Olympic began to turn left, giving 2 short signals. Its speed began to increase. The cruiser Hawk caught up with the ocean liner, and for some time they walked abreast. Then the cruiser began. Suddenly the Hawk turned sharply to the left and, at full speed, hit the side of the giant Olympic. The blow was quite strong. Many felt a small push. The crew of the Olympic discovered a 14-meter hole on the starboard side. 2 compartments were damaged, but the hole did not threaten the liner with serious consequences. Captain Edward John Smith gave the order to transfer the passengers to another ship and then sent it to the ship for repairs. The cruiser Hawk received serious damage, but boldly and moved to the side. Part of the plating was torn off, but miraculously the bulkheads withstood this deformation, and the cruiser was even able to independently come to the port for repairs. The White Star Line Company put forward accusations against the commander of the Royal Navy, stating that the cruiser deliberately rammed the Olympic. In response, counter-accusations were brought forward in which the captain of the Olympic was condemned, namely, neglect of the rules of the driving court. As a result, the White Star Line Company was found guilty and ordered to pay for the repair of the cruiser. It was believed that the cause of the collision was the ships being sucked into in the modern world. This phenomenon is called the hydrodynamic attraction of ships in a similar situation, when they are sailing here in parallel courses. A specific distribution of zones of high and low water pressure is created along the hull of the vessel. The attraction acts much stronger on a vessel of smaller displacement. It can completely lose control. In modern textbooks on boat driving, it is said that a vessel of smaller size should overtake this large ship at the maximum distance from today's point of view. The culprit of the collision was the captain of the cruiser Hawk, who performed a dangerous overtaking of a larger ship. But then, at the beginning of the 20th century, this phenomenon was unstudied. In April 1912, the Olympic left the port of New York. The new captain of the ship was Gerber James Haddock. Captain Edward Smith was transferred to the Titanic on the night of April 15. The radio operator received an alarming message that the Titanic was damaged. Not yet realizing the scale of the tragedy, the radio operator tried to find out whether the Olympic should go to the rescue or the Titanic would get to the port on its own. What was the answer received? "We are imprisoning women in the boat." Bourne reported that the Olympic was in full swing to help, but he was too far from his drowning twin brother. The surviving passengers of the Titanic were taken by the passenger steamer Carpathia. When the Olympic arrived in Southampton, the city was in mourning. In August 1914, the Olympic was withdrawn from commercial service in connection with the outbreak of the Second World War. Bertrand Foxways became the new captain. The ship was equipped with artillery weapons. From that moment, the Olympic was listed as a military ship under the number T-2810 on October 1, 1915. The Olympic carried 6,000 soldiers minus Samatapan. The crew of the liner noticed the boats of a sunken French steamer Provence. The Olympic captain ordered to immediately stop the ship and pick up the survivors. France offered to award the captain a gold medal for the rescue, but Britain had a different opinion. She accused the Olympic captain of negligence due to the fact that he stopped in dangerous waters and risked the lives of 6,000 soldiers on one of the Olympic voyages, and was in British waters considered a dangerous zone. Accompanied by 4 American cruisers, unexpectedly in the English Channel area, the crew noticed a German submarine that was on the surface of the water on the right side of the Olympic. The crew of the ship was anxiously expecting that it would now be torpedoed by a German submarine. But by some miracle, the submarine did not notice the huge liner. Then the Olympic captain ordered to shoot at the submarine. But the target was already so close that it was impossible to lower the gun low enough to destroy the enemy. The shells flew literally over the heads of the German crew. Only at that moment they saw the approaching giant ship. The commander of the German submarine ordered to immediately begin diving in this situation. It was the only way to dive and try to hide from the attacking ship. But it was too late. Olympic overtook the submarine and, at full speed, brought down 46,000 tons of its weight on it, cutting the submarine in half, after which it quickly sank. The Olympic captain asked the American escort ships to pick up the surviving German sailors. 31 people were rescued. The Olympic itself received minor damage, which was almost invisible above the surface of the water. The stem was bent after the First World War. The Olympic underwent modernization. It was transferred from coal to oil. The coal bunkers were removed in their place. Liquid fuel tanks were located. The refueling time was significantly reduced. In addition, coal dust no longer caused discomfort to the passengers of the liner. The Olympic crew was reduced from 360 to November 60, 1929. A very strange incident happened to the Olympic. He was making a flight to New York NEO. Unexpectedly, strong shaking began on the ship. The crew could not understand what had happened nearby. There were no other ships with which could have collided. The engines worked properly. The loss of a propeller blade was excluded. A real shock for the team was the fact that during the strong vibration, the Olympic was located exactly in the place where the Titanic sank 17 years ago. Later, this phenomenon was explained by the underwater earthquake that occurred in 1934. John became the captain of the Olympic Binks in May of this year. A tragic incident occurred. The Olympic was in New York waters. There was dense fog all around. The crew of the ship saw the lighthouse ahead. Too late, John Binks ordered the engines to be reversed. But there was no time left for maneuver. The giant ship crushed the lighthouse. 7 people died on it. 4 managed to survive despite the reputation of a reliable ocean liner. The Olympic was rapidly aging against the backdrop of the Great Depression and the emergence of the newest new generation liners. The company could not find enough funds for major repairs and modernization of the Olympic. And after preparations began for the creation of a new super project of the transatlantic liner Queen Mary, Olympics days were numbered for more than 5 months. He stood next to his former rival Mauritania, waiting to be dismantled for metal. The entire interior of the liner was sold at auction at the end of 1937. Dismantling and disposal of the ship was completed. The chief engineer of the liner noted that its engines remained in good working order as always. Olympic made 257 flights across the Atlantic, carried 420,000 passengers, and covered 1,800,000 sea.